Good morning. It's Martin reporting from Eugene, Oregon. It's July 20th, 2017, Thursday morning. 9 days ago, July 11th, marked the 7th anniversary of when I first published a website and then a Facebook post called The Red Pill Guide. And in that guide, I tried to point out what I considered to be 20 hidden truths that were in need of attention by most people in order to help make the world a better place and make sure that we're operating from models of reality that are actually valid. And I think nobody wants to destroy the world, and yet we find ourselves here on the brink of the sixth mass extinction event in the history of the world. And that is largely due, in my opinion, to people operating out of models of reality that are not valid. And some of the hidden truths that I've tried to draw attention to can help correct some of those models and enable people to operate in ways that will produce the results that we want to see, positive results. But they're not easy truths to grapple with, not easy ones to accept. For the past 7 years, if I reflect on how that's gone, I think in the first 2 to 3 years, from 2010 to through 2012, maybe even 2013 somewhat, it was pretty satisfying. A lot of people found my material, were challenged by it. Some of them, dug deeper. I did get some reports from people saying they found the website and they stayed up nights for 6 weeks watching videos and going to websites and completely changing their worldview. But more recently, Facebook has kind of damped down what appears in people's news feeds so that the exposure that I get for things that I post is far lower. In fact, many of the large pages and group pages on Facebook report that things are now less than 10% likely to end up in people's news feeds when they post them than back in the better years of 2010 to 2013, 14. So that's become less satisfying, and it's, I think, in part because the format of discussing things in text-based comments is very logical. People only communicate about 10% based on the words, and 90% is vocal inflection, expressions, and body language. And Facebook or a text-based discussion system like that can be very logical, and yet it just doesn't reach most people. I've been very good at logic in my career. A computer scientist. I know what is necessary and sufficient to form a proof or to create functionality that meets a requirement. But that's not the way people work, obviously. And to try and do this experiment online to try to reach people and engage them and hopefully improve their model of reality that they're operating from is a task that I now believe is not well suited to logic alone. I'm not saying we should dismiss logic at all. But I think it takes more than that. Logic, by its nature, is kind of an acquired skill. Most people have to go to high school or college to gain the skills to do logical analysis and recognize some of the fallacies in conventional thinking. So it's an acquired skill, and you can get very good at it, but it's unrealistic to expect most people to be able to recognize what is necessary and sufficient to prove a point from a logical, constructive standpoint. What people are very good at is stories, not stories in the sense of made up mythology, but stories in the sense of telling people a series of events from a beginning to a middle to an end a beginning point, a conflict, a challenge, a rising above that challenge, a success, and then a resolution. Every toddler who's ever listened to stories at bedtime knows how to listen to a story, to hang words and ideas on the framework of a story. And in retrospect, when I go back and look how people make really big changes in their worldview, perception of the world, it's not through logic alone, even though after the fact they can go back and say, here's the logic that I followed to get to this conclusion. The actual process is more often than not a story, a sequence of events that happens to them or that they discover, and then they're able to take that story and find the points of it that create a logical construction. It's almost a parallel construction. They go back and create, here's the logic that supports what I learned in the story. And that is helpful for the individual's process, but it doesn't help them to communicate how they got to where they are today to somebody else who's still where they were a year or two ago in terms of their discovery of a certain topic. It's many of the world's greatest literature comes from travels and journeys and stories, like from Homer's Odyssey to Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. There's a sense of moving through space, of discovering new places, and adapting one's worldview to encompass those new experiences. And I think that a lot of the dialogue that we have on Facebook and other text-based discussions is a lot like people going from one position and trying to lob artillery shells into another position to create change. It's a somewhat hostile, there's no real joining, there's no face-to-face communication, as opposed to somebody walking over to where this person is here and saying, I know of this other place that I got to by following this path, and I can take you there with me if you want to listen to my story. It's the difference between a still picture and a motion picture, a movie. You can see the movement. It's much more accessible. I've gone through two stages in my life where I would consider myself to have been a seeker. One was in high school, and at that time, information was mostly available in the form of books and the occasional documentary. And I found myself reading books on somewhat esoteric subjects and coming down to the question of, could I really trust, based on what was on the printed page, that this person was having an authentic experience and they were relating it accurately? And because of that medium, the printed page, I was left with inconclusive. I didn't know if they were telling the truth or not. With video and with a motion picture, with a story like we're able to see on YouTube, it's quite different. Whereas back in college, I was able to read books on, I'll say, out-of-body experiences, to choose one topic of many. I was left with a feeling of inconclusive because these weren't experiences that I was able to replicate. There may be some process I could go through to get to where I could replicate those experiences, but I wasn't able to at that time, nor now. And I didn't know if the people behind the words on the printed page were telling me the truth or trying to pull a fast one or what. But when you go on YouTube and listen to people's direct experiences, describing their direct experiences of, say, near-death experiences, or some of the Disclosure Project witnesses who have experienced unexplained aerial vehicles, UFOs, you can sense that these people definitely do believe what they're saying. You can then question yourself, are they psychotic? Well, they don't act like a psychotic on the camera. You have much more information in their facial expressions and so forth, and I think much more authenticity. So, in hindsight, from 2017 to 2010, I would say it's been a good experiment, but it's time to step things up. It's time for me to come out from behind this mannequin mask that I used to use as my profile picture and be me on camera and put myself out there in a more accessible way that is a little bit scary, and it's also it also feels like I'm rising to a challenge and something I want to do. So I am starting this video series. I toyed with a couple of different ideas based on NPR shows. All Things Reconsidered came to mind right away, but that's already been taken by the Doonesbury character, Mark Slackmeyer. So I wouldn't want to step on anybody's toes there. Other television, or not television, but radio series I thought I might kind of change the name of a little bit was perhaps having a conspiracy home companion to do a slightly more laid-back version. I think people have had enough of the angry conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones, and they want to, maybe it's time for somebody to come along and calmly explain what has been found to be the truth. And then, of course, maybe a spurious name like Wait, Don't Kill Me would be another series. But I think to stick with the idea of a journey, to stick with the idea of a story, I want to call it a journey in truth. So I think I'll call this series a Journey to the Center of the Truth, to change the old Journey to the Center of the Earth science fiction story name. And what do I mean by a journey in truth? I want to, my next video, I'll start kind of explaining my own journey in truth of what got me started on this path, where my worldview was when I started, what I discovered at different stages along the way, and what kind of a worldview I've kind of come to at this point. And that's a more fluid thing than saying, here's the position, or my current position, the position. There's a difference between that, because when it's my current position, you can go and visit that, and you can look around and see what you think of it. But if somebody says it's my position, this is, or the position, God forbid, it's like, no, I don't think I want to try that on, So a journey in truth it's kind of distilled from many people's adventures in discovering these difficult worldview changing truths. And I would say it begins with when the protagonist, if you will, is kind of in a normal worldview frame of mind, or perhaps they're accumulating information, but they're discounting it, but it's still nagging at them. So there's this accumulating massive anomalous data that doesn't fit into their worldview. Or maybe it's all at once. They could have a near-death experience and subjectively experience something that's quite different from their former worldview that propels them forward very rapidly. I think my own experience was in between, in that I had both accumulating anomalous data. In my case, it was about corporate greed, foreign interventions, and rigged elections. It came to a head about the 2004-2005 time frame. So it's kind of in between those two extremes of a slow accumulation of information versus a very sudden experience that kind of breaks one in a kind of a punctuated evolutionary way into a new worldview. There's myself and Kevin Tilsner have discussed in the past the similarity between this journey in truth process and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of death and dying, DABDA, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Because changing the worldview is very much like a death. It's a death of the old worldview, which is something that is very core to who we are. It's part of our identity, is what we believe the world is around us. And when that is changed or threatened or changed, we become defensive and quite knocked off of our bearings for a while. The journey in truth continues past that initial event with with those 5 stages, but also this expanding sense of, well, this thing turned out not to be true. How does that relate to other things I thought are true? I need to reevaluate everything that I've concluded was true in the past and see if I still believe that or not. That begins a stage that I sometimes refer to as the free fall, where you truly open your mind to these anomalous data that have been accumulating, and you reevaluate one thing after another. And in many people's experience, you find that there's a whole raft of things that, it's sort of like once you get to cleaning out your garage. At first it seems like you can't get rid of anything, and then you find, oh, it's easier and easier once I get rid of all this junk. And it's the same way in our minds. You think, I can't get rid of any of these thoughts as part of my worldview, but once you begin clearing out what is actually junk, it becomes easier until you get down to the essentials, and you have room for things that aren't junk after that. The free fall continues for a while, and then it gradually quiets down, and person reaches a new equilibrium around a new worldview. And that worldview may have slight perturbations to it later on, but for the most part, it's like a transition that goes through an S-curve. Like there's a slow change, and then this change is very sudden, and then it kind of asymptotically balances out towards the second asymptote. So the journey in truth is more than an incremental learning of knowledge. Many of us have this model kind of from a geometry or a mathematical sense of what's truth and what's reality, where we have these postulates and we have theorems, and we can construct a network of knowledge facts based on that. And that becomes a tree of information that we can add new branches onto. This is different in that a journey in truth often involves discarding old information. That's very hard to do. Scientist Max Planck once talked about science proceeding only one funeral at a time, because people tend not to change their minds. People have careers and reputations based on old conclusions that they came to, which maybe turn out not to be true down the road, but they don't want to ever admit that because it's part of their identity, part of who they are. And it actually ends up taking new minds, new people coming along, replenishing the population of thinkers within physics or other disciplines. And I think that's a very unhopeful scenario for me, because humanity is now in a time of catastrophic change that's going to require us to adapt much faster than can be accomplished by waiting for people with an old paradigm to die off and be replaced by people with new ways of thinking. And it isn't exactly clear yet that we are able to produce these new people with new ways of thinking. It's there are some reasons to hope for that, but for the most part, it appears people are still locked in a number of erroneous models of the world. So I would leave it at that, and we'll see you next time on Journey to the Center of the Truth.